Local News Roundup in the wake of two mass shootings. Safety is on everyone's mind. In Charlotte, Drew Piscaro, the survivor of the UNC-Charlotte mass shooting, asks the legislature to act on two gun control bills. We hear other local reaction to the shootings and about security enhancements at the county, the university, and at CMS. Ernest Winston completes his first week as CMS superintendent. The state employees' health care plan hits the snag, but they solved that last night. And J.P. Morgan Chase opens a branch in North Carolina with more branches and ATMs to come, along with jobs, enhancing our stature as a locus for banking. Our roundtable of reporters is set to detail those and other stories, and those reporters include Ann Doss-Helm. She's here from WFAE's newsroom, where she is our new education reporter, newly minted and crowned.
Why, thank you.
Have any experience in that area? Reporting on education?
I haven't had a crown before, so I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Well, actually, those are headphones. You'll get used to it. Eric Spanberg is managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Mike.
Joe Bruno is a reporter for WSSC-TV Channel 9 Eyewitness News. Welcome to you.
Good morning, Mike.
And Daniel Shemtab is back. She's a reporter for the Charlotte Observer. Good morning.
Good morning.
You can watch us on Facebook Live if that's not enough for you to listen on the radio. You can see the back of Eric and Daniel's heads. There were two mass shootings last weekend, as we all know, one in Dayton, Ohio, the other in El Paso. Reaction, particularly from politicians, was swift, and that filtered down to the local level. If you thought that Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke was emotional about the shootings in his hometown, and he let the president have it, just listen to Wilmington Democrat Deb Butler as she reacted while trying to force debate on a pair of gun bills that Republican leadership shelved months ago.
We have heard the pleas of this nation, the chants of El Paso and Dayton to do something. They cry out, do something, do something, do something. It is time to do something. How long are we going to sit around? How long?
She wasn't the only person asking that questions and asking officials to do something. More and more rank-and-file people from around the country seem to be at a tipping point. Is that true here in North Carolina, do we think?
Sure. I mean, I think that the first place you look is the UNC-Charlotte student, Drew Piscaro. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He goes up to Raleigh and is part of a press conference, and he's pulling his shirt up for reporters, showing off the scar from being a shooting victim at UNCC just this spring. And I think that you're hearing a lot of this. You just played that clip. I think you're hearing a lot of this across the state and across the city because we have had so many of these. And I know, Mike, you have said to me on air plenty of times, how many times will we go through this?
And you're seeing some national publications put this on their front pages and magazines and things like that, saying enough's enough, essentially. Is that, and evidently Mitch McConnell is saying they will tackle that when they come back from their August recess. That would be a major move, would it not?
It would. It seems like there's some movement on the federal level for possibly taking up these so-called red flag laws where you can report someone if you're concerned about having them have a weapon, and then a judge can go and rule whether those weapons should be taken away from that person. That's where the most momentum seems to be, at least at a federal level. On the state level, that was one of the things that Drew Piscaro was talking about at his press conference was he just wants a hearing. He just wants this to be taken up, a discussion, a possible vote. That way the lawmakers who are proposing these things, they can find out what's wrong with their bills. Why aren't they being passed?
Here's one of the things that Drew Piscaro said at that press conference in Raleigh earlier this week.
I can't help but feel as if the deaths of Riley Howell and Reed Parlier at UNC-Charlotte weren't memorable enough to bring this bill to vote 3 months ago. I don't want pity for what happened to me. I received plenty of that already, and I'm tired of living my life as the victim. This wasn't the life I asked for. I just want action.
And as you mentioned, he also in that press conference pulled up his shirt and talked about the bullet holes, that you could see the scars from those bullet holes clearly on his upper torso. He's there to essentially not demand, I guess, but to ask the legislature to move on these two pieces of legislation that were introduced months ago. What do those two pieces of legislation contain?
Well, the first one is the red flag law. The second one is called the Gun Violence Protection Act. That would require a permit for all guns purchased in the state, not just pistols. It would also set a minimum age of 21 to purchase an assault weapon.
And you'd have a 3-day waiting period.
Correct.
So stop just right there, because when I read some of this stuff yesterday, I thought you don't have to have a permit to purchase some guns. Which guns do you not have to have a permit for?
I believe a permit is only needed for pistols.
So you can buy an assault rifle without a permit in North Carolina?
That's what the law is trying to change.
Does that strike you as odd?
Yeah, but another thing that strikes me as odd is that the loopholes that we always discuss about gun shows. Having a different set of rules based on where you buy the gun. That seems, at minimum, quite inconsistent, to make a grand understatement, but we're still fighting about this. I do think, so many times we've had this conversation, nothing's happened. You do hear a lot more urgency mixed with anger, and I think that's what forces political opinion and political decisions is how much noise are people making. And when you have people outside of Mitch McConnell's Kentucky office making a lot of racket, then maybe he starts to reconsider. But remember, with politics, it's a long game. If the pressure eases, then so will the will.
So getting back to Drew Piscaro, who is one of the survivors of the UNC-Charlotte shooting, who went to Raleigh to participate in this press conference to urge the legislature to pass these two gun bills that have been on, where they were first introduced when? How do we know?
March?
Okay.
Yeah. Is it older than that?
He said, "It just amazes me that I still have to live my daily life affected by this tragedy, and it's taken this long to try to even get a vote on these two bills," to which Republican Senate leader Phil Berger tweeted, "He is always willing to listen to proposed solutions on any topic, but he questioned whether the measures supported by Democrats would have stopped these recent tragedies." Joe, you reported that Drew Piscaro tweeted a response to that. Is that correct?
Yes, he did. Piscaro is just extremely frustrated at this point. He feels like the UNC-Charlotte shooting should have been enough to force lawmakers to act. And here we are going through Gilroy, Dayton, and El Paso, and we're just trying to get a vote in the legislature. So he's basically like, what's happening now isn't enough. You can't just sit around and do nothing. We have to hear some sort of solutions, especially if you're not going to consider these two bills that have been sitting around for months.
And he had tweeted a long open letter in June, I think, in which he talked about just this ongoing struggle. And I think sometimes we forget that. We get into the body counts and how many died, and we forget that the injured, this just goes on and on. He was in the hospital. He's been back in for infections. His life has really been upended. And in his letter, he said, essentially, it feels like we just wish for the best for the people involved, and then we move on. And he said, I did the same until I got hit by the bullets.
Phil Berger holds the same position in the North Carolina Senate that Mitch McConnell holds in the United States Senate. Are they functioning in the same way here?
Yeah, well, they have, yes. Now, if Mitch McConnell ends up bringing something to the floor or allowing something to come to the floor, then that would be the first parting of ways. But up to this point, yes, they have functioned almost identically.
So let's go back to this red flag law. We have one that's been proposed, and it's been proposed around the country, some of these red flag laws, and these would restrict access to firearms to people whom their family members or others view as a threat to themselves or a threat to other people. Is that right?
Right. Correct. That's in essence answering the question when you hear people in aftermath say, oh, well, I thought so-and-so might be troubled. Yes.
So President Trump says he supports red flag laws. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham says he will propose legislation aimed at getting more states to adopt red flag laws. This hasn't moved federal or state Republicans in any way? That's pretty big support.
Well, I mean, it has just happened, so I guess we will find out how much it has moved them. I think it is notable that Lindsey Graham is saying that. Now,
Well, he's saying it because the president's
well,
saying
right. but as always, particularly with the president, that we've had shootings in the past where the president has said he's willing to make changes to the law, overhaul the structure of how guns are sold or controlled, and then he's done nothing.
That's I've heard some commentators say that when these things happen, not just this thing, but other things happen of note, the president will chime in with a solution, and everything dies down because the news cycle moves on, and he kind of speeds up the news cycle in many ways, and nothing happens because that's just forgotten.
Right. And
Seen so many of these and had so many of these conversations where, whether it was Sandy Hook or, keep filling in the blanks, where everybody says, surely this is the thing. Surely no one can let this stand. And like you said, the news cycle moves on.
And unfortunately, there's been so many mass shootings that I can't even keep track of them all. But
Right.
after one of them, the president said, we're going to do great things for background checks. We're going to do great work, background checks like you've never seen before, and that just never happened.
Right.
So Democrats apparently are on one side of this issue clearly because there are a lot of Democrats running for president. This is a good political issue. There are Republicans. I don't mean to cast aspersions on their motivations, but it's true. Republicans seem to be on the other side. Why is there such a divide over this? We're completely divided on everything, but why this? Because people's lives are at stake, and there was a mass shooting involving Congress not too long ago.
Yeah, you're right, though. It is just one of those core political issues that there seems to be no give. And if you do begin to retrench in any way, you're going to be pilloried by the rest of your party. And so I think that's why it continues. And of course, it goes back to the change in the interpretation of the Second Amendment years ago by the Supreme Court. And you just start there, and then everybody takes their hardline positions, and they don't back off.
Okay. Well, Mecklenburg County Manager Dina Diorio pitched security enhancements this week after the back-to-back shootings this weekend. She said, quote, "We feel like we are at a place where we don't have much of a choice but to accelerate our security posture." What is she suggesting?
She is suggesting weapons screening not only for visitors but also for employees at certain county facilities. She has not identified those facilities yet. And also county employees will have to take yearly online run, hide, fight active shooter training.
And Joe, I think, did you report it's a $12 million initial investment and then $6 million a year ongoing?
Correct, 12.3.
So we have, you can't get into the city, what's it called? The
government center.
The government center. You can't get out without going through screening like an airport screening.
Yeah, I've had them unzip my change purse and look inside to see what's there.
So,
But employees can
They
just
just walk
scan their
through.
badge and walk through.
Okay.
But what's also interesting is the government center is technically owned by the city, so any major changes to that building would have to be approved by city council. But the manager did say they're looking at enhancing security on the 11th floor where county commissioners have their offices, because at this point you could just exit the elevator, turn right, and have immediate
and that is
access.
something Commissioner Vilmalik says she is grateful for.
I have spoken about this from the first day I came up here in this building on the 11th floor. Because you can just walk right in, and people could walk right in and just blow us all away.
So, as you mentioned, Joe, the city owns the building, so anything that changes in that building, where county offices are also ensconced, would have to go through the city council. They are also in that building.
I was just going to say, for all of us who have been up to the top floor where you have the council members and the city manager, it's not particularly overly secure. Would that be a fair description, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely.
The mayor's office is in that building.
Correct.
So are they likely to get on board with this?
I think if the county commissioners overhaul their security, the city council members will follow.
Okay. So what other buildings are they thinking about putting this in, the county, very quickly?
So they haven't identified them yet, but just think of all the buildings that they have, especially that one off Freedom Drive, the Woodward Center. I think that's one that will get a lot of
It's
attention.
Joe Bruno from WSSC-TV, Channel 9 Eyewitness News. Daniel Shemtab is also with us from the Charlotte Observer, and Doss Helms from WFAE, and Eric Spanberg from the Business Journal. We're coming right back. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Gardner-Webb University, announcing their new 10-month online Master's in Business Administration degree, and now accepting applications at gardner-webb.edu/MBA10. And Levine Cancer Institute, part of Atrium Health, dedicated to bringing care and treatments to the Carolinas, offering access to current clinical trials and 200 cancer doctors at more than 25 locations. Atrium Health. Well, coming up on Monday, we're going to do this again. We tried to do this last week and we couldn't get it in. But just when you think it's safe to go back onto the radio, sharks. Are you afraid of them? Have they kept you out of the ocean? Despite the scary headlines and a handful of tragic cases of shark attacks, your chances of being bitten are incredibly low. In fact, we are more of a threat to them than they are to us. Much more, and you can find out why Monday at 9.
Days of despair and political debate as the U.S. faces the question of what to do in the wake of more mass shootings.
We must shine light on the dark recesses of the internet and stop mass murders before they start.
Plus, the latest on Puerto Rico's leadership crisis. The Friday News Roundup, next time on 1A.
The roundup of the week's news continues next from 10 to noon with 1A on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're all here gathered together for our local news roundup until the end of the hour here with Eric Spanberg from the Charlotte Business Journal, Danielle Shemtab, a reporter for the Charlotte Observer. Hold up your hands. I want to see if there's any printer's ink. Joe Bruno is here from WSSC-TV, and Ann Doss-Helms from WFAE News. Speaking of Ann Doss-Helms, our education reporter, security measures are also being announced for CMS. They showcased their latest safety measures on Wednesday of this week. Was that a planned event, or was that in response to the shootings this past weekend?
I think it was a planned event. They, in fact, you could say maybe some of this is what they're getting for their $30,000 that they spent for crisis communications, because just as soon as they named a new superintendent, they said, we're also going to have back-to-school briefings every week between now and then, which you could be cynical and say that's distracting, but it's also a really good way to communicate this. And the safety could not have been better timed, because people are asking what's going to be in place.
After Parkland and after Butler, that we talked with former Superintendent Clayton Wilcox about security measures and that were going to be considered and were put into place, and the money being spent on all those things. How does what they announced this past Wednesday differ from what we already know about?
It's pretty much playing out the measures that they had already started. There was no way that Ernest Winston could have come in 1 week, without a budget and shuffled it. We talked a lot about the whole idea of they wanted to screen and protect high schools, and when it was initially announced, it kind of sounded like they were just going to screen every student coming into a school, and that never happened, and they're now saying that's not going to happen.
Can't happen.
Right, it's not practical.
Take the whole
day. And Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High is one that is about the size of our biggest ones, an Ardrey Kell or a South Meck, and they went back and forth on that. Obviously, huge incentive there. People were talking about donating permanent metal detectors, and ultimately the school and the school board said, no, this doesn't work. So Charlotte-Mecklenburg, they are adding metal detectors, and that was one of the headlines, but it's not going to be just set up at the door. It's going to be these portable ones that they can bring in. What they're going to do is select a building from a large school. So, a Myers Park High or whatever, West Charlotte, they're going to kind of randomly come in and swoop in on one building. They move the students out of the classrooms, and they're saying it's a lot quicker to walk them through a portable metal detector than to just wand them. And, of course, they also introduced then their newest member of the security team, Nico. They had already had Gage, who is a drug-sniffing dog, who had been doing this kind of thing in schools. So Nico is trained to sniff out gunpowder. He's a 2-year-old German Shepherd. They brought him in to do a demo.
I don't know anything about how that works, but if you have a gun and that has not yet been fired, can the dog detect gunpowder within the bullet capsule? I don't know.
That's way more technical than we got into.
All right. Okay. So did we know these enhancements were coming? Clearly Ernest Winston has not had time to plan them. So if they were already in the works, these are Clayton Wilcox's enhancements, right?
Basically, yes.
Okay. New Superintendent Ernest Winston says that among the new safety measures at the schools will be cards that staffers will be issued that can trigger automatic lockdowns.
We don't want to instill a sense of fear, but we want to make sure that they understand the reality and to protect themselves at all times.
So how do these cards work?
Well, it looks like it's the ones they showed were just kind of hanging from a lanyard. It looks like the things that most of us use to get into our buildings or parking lots.
They have buttons on them?
I think they must have some kind of buttons, because it's not just a simple swipe, and they made a point of saying this is not going to be easy. You know, we've all had a pocket dial or something, that this is not something where if you brush up against something, the police are going to be swarming in and assuming there's, you know, a major incident.
Because I understand that they can trigger different kinds of warnings. It could be an active shooter warning. It could be something else. And
it could be a medical emergency.
Lights will flash around the building in different colors, and different kinds of things will go off depending upon how the lanyard is activated. That sounds very complicated to me.
Well, yeah, and there may be mistakes with it, but the goal, it seems to me, is that especially for if a student has a medical crisis, you know, a seizure or a severe allergic reaction, assuming people remember how to code it in properly, or if, oh, God forbid, a teacher steps outside the door of a building and sees somebody coming with a gun, they don't have to run to the office, they don't have to get on the intercom and say something that might alert anybody to where they are. They can just push in this code, and they have now better video surveillance, they're saying. They have the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools Police Department will immediately be alerted. Administration in the school and in central offices will be alerted. So they're hoping that this gives them a little better odds if there should be something tragic.
So Superintendent Winston singled out Charlotte East Language Academy as the CMS beacon of what a school with enhanced security and safety measures would look like. Why them?
I am not 100% sure. A lot of this is starting in the high schools and will be trickling down to the middle schools and the K-8 schools. For instance, these random searches will be happening in the lower grades. Charlotte East is a K-8 school. It's also a very new building, and I think that they kind of took that one as they were building it and developing it and said, let's showcase some of these things here.
Our producers tell us that, yes, the dogs can smell the gunpowder even before the gun is fired. Interesting.
Smart dogs.
Smart dogs. Sit, boy, sit. All right, UNC-Charlotte, also the site of a mass shooting last April 30th, and new safety measures have been implemented there already this year. What have they done?
Well, they did a live stream just this week saying this is really going to be a different feel for this start of the school year because of that happening. They've put a lot of focus on active shooter training. They call theirs ALICE, or Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, Evacuate. It's that same kind of thing about the different steps you take depending on where you are and what the threat is. They actually say they've hired 13 ALICE instructors, one for each college, and they're doing these sessions. They've actually started this week. Classes don't really start until August 19th, but for people who are coming in, for new faculty, et cetera, they want to really make sure that people know how to handle this. They said they've hired 2 rangers, and I'm not sure what a ranger is, but for security at the light rail station. They are going to have a significantly enhanced police presence on campus. They're going to have metal detectors, more metal detectors, and bag searches at football games and big events. They're looking at improving the locks on classroom doors. There have been some concerns about that, and of course they're teaching faculty how to wedge the doors. So,
yeah, John Bogdan, Associate Vice Chancellor for Safety, mentions this very simple thing that I've never heard anybody mention. He said, buy a door wedge and stick it in the door. The guy can't open it from the outside. If the door opens in, you put the wedge in, you can't open the door.
Yeah, and I have not used one of those, but that's one of the things they talk about.
Ever used the door wedge? Yeah, the little thing you put at the bottom of the door.
Is that literally what it is?
Yeah,
it's just a little rubber thing? Okay.
Yeah, little door stop.
I thought they had a fancy security version.
I'd never heard anybody mention that before. We're going to stick with you for a second or two because this was the first week, the first full week of Ernest Winston as the new CMS school superintendent. Are the reviews in yet?
Well, I'd say
these superintendents are on a short leash right now.
You get 5 days, just 5 days.
I'd say they kind of split into 2 camps, and one is very positive. I think there really has just been a lot of churn fatigue here, and a lot of people are saying, thank goodness we didn't go through another period of uncertainty. Thank goodness they picked somebody from within so we don't have to, learn a new boss, figure out what the new initiatives are. This is somebody who can carry forward. I have not encountered anybody who says that they worked with Ernest Winston and they really think he's bad. The people who've worked with him, and there are a lot of them, speak very highly of him. Of course, it's smart to speak highly of the new boss. But the other camp is people who don't know him and are asking, what on earth were these guys thinking? Because as we discussed last week, his resume probably wouldn't get past the first screening for one of the 20th largest school districts in America, which Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools is. So, and what I've been telling people is I really think that they hired for character over credentials. You know, they had 2 searches.
Because they also have hired somebody who is not going to push back on the board as much as perhaps Clayton Wilcox and Heath Morrison and others before them did.
Well, somebody put it that way to me. Is he a yes man? And I don't know. When you are in a number 2, as a lieutenant type position, you have to be a yes man, at least in public. You know, you have to back up the boss. So that's what we've seen. But what we don't know is, behind closed doors, does he stand up for himself? He will at some point. The board is going to be divided on something. So if he is just a pleaser, he's going to hit a snag when one chunk of the board is saying go left and another chunk is saying go right. But people seem to have confidence that he's ready for this.
In an interview with WFAE's Lisa Worf on Morning Edition, he was asked if he took anything away from the abrupt departures of past superintendents Clayton Wilcox and Heath Morrison.
One of the things that's important is that we realize that all people are important and that we have to have respect for everyone, no matter what your position is in the district. And so I try to be the same person every day, no matter who I'm talking with. And I think that's extremely important, is to treat all people well.
And you felt like that didn't happen before?
There are varying levels of that, but one of the things that is important to me, one of my core values, is respect, and respecting all people.
Can we read anything into that to come up with the reason why Clayton Wilcox was forced to resign?
Well, I do think it was a very tactful answer, but I think there is some significance there. We know that Heath Morrison was accused of being abusive toward some of his staff members. There was talk about a culture of fear. And with Clayton Wilcox, I talked to a number of people who said that he was not, that principals felt mistreated by him, that he would sometimes, they felt like single people out for criticism in front of their peers. There were a lot of people who left. Now, I want to put a big asterisk by that. I never wrote a story because no one was ever willing to go on the record, but these were people that I know to be credible and that don't just complain about, this was not, somebody just shooting a comment on social media. So I think that there were concerns about the way that he treated people. And it's always hard to tell because, again, no top person is universally popular. Ernest Winston won't be, but I think he was pointing at something that needs to be fixed.
When Clayton Wilcox first came here, that we spent a lot of time on this program and others, and I'm sure you expended a lot of ink when you were at the Observer writing about some of the hires that he made when he first came here. He brought people in from his old district, which is not uncommon because people who at the top of organizations bring in people that they know they like to work with. But he put them in odd positions like executive chef or something, designing menus for the school system at outlandish salaries, it seemed to many people. Are those people's jobs secure, or are they going to be looking for jobs soon?
That's a really interesting question. And I think the pair of the Franciscos are the ones that got a lot of attention. He brought in Laura Francisco as his chief of staff. She had been working with him in Hagerstown, Maryland. She and Ernest Winston and Tracy Russ, the chief of communications, were what people called Clayton Wilcox's big three. He basically told the school board, you don't need to call me, but if you talk to any of those three, you've essentially talked to me. So they were his inner core. So one possibility is that Ernest Winston has become very close to her and respects her and trusts her, and another possibility is that she is Clayton Wilcox's person and will be floating her resume.
Lisa Worf also asked Ernest Winston if he ever thought a month ago that he would be the next superintendent, and he responded, I knew it was a possibility. So how long do you think Clayton Wilcox's departure was in the works? I mean, do you think the board also intended not to conduct the search once they knew that he would take the job, Ernest Winston? He knew it was a possibility. They'd been talking to him.
Right, although he clarified on that. My ears perked up too. He wasn't saying that a couple of months ago they started talking to him. He was saying that this started when they suspended Clayton Wilcox. So yes, I think once they decided to push that button, they started talking very quickly about a way to do this.
Which is normal.
Yeah. And they didn't get to pushing that button with no advance. There was apparently a long closed-door meeting in June, but somewhere between January, as we've talked about, when he got the good review, and July, when he got pushed out the door, they decided this marriage could not work.
So he would not answer Lisa Worf's question about whether or not the public deserves to know why Clayton Wilcox is now gone. He said that that's a board matter. And then, switching on a dime, he turned to say that you would see greater transparency with this administration. So that he's shifting the transparent question away from the board to his administration. Was the Wilcox administration transparent?
You know, there has never been a superintendent to come in who has not talked about greater transparency and better communication. There has never been a school board member who has not campaigned on that. I know virtually all of these school board members since before they were board members, and they did not come in saying, we're going to be really secretive about things. They came in, they would have been the people I would have had on speed dial to get reaction to something like this, to say, we need better answers. The community needs trust. So, you know, I said that they hired Ernest Winston because they feel like they can trust him. You can maybe fill gaps in experience and credentials. They feel like they can trust him, and that's hugely important. But then the question becomes, will the community trust the board?
Thank goodness, Mike, we don't have these problems with the county commission or city council.
But you know, soap operas have been popular for 80 years for a reason. There's drama, there's romance, there's an ever-changing story that really never changes. It's the same story over and over and over again. And I've never lived in a place where the school system has such soap opera drama constantly.
Well, you need to get on certain listservs and things, because there are school boards where they literally have physical fights and sue each other and are really. Ours is an interesting board in that it does not act crazy now. I mean, if you listen to them talk, they behave and they very professionally, but behind closed doors, something keeps going wrong.
Well, speaking of drama, the state employees' health care plan was scheduled to go into effect in about 2 months, and this week it was announced that only 5 hospitals had signed up as in-network providers out of 120 hospitals in the state, including the UNC health system, which is owned by the state. They refused to sign up for it, too. This is a program administered by Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. That all changed yesterday. What happened?
The state blinked.
Yeah.
Essentially, the treasurer called a truce and keeping it in place.
Yeah, he had been basically, saying he wanted greater transparency with the rates that hospitals were setting. So instead, he had suggested in his original plan, that the state would set a price. I think it was like 200% of Medicare rates, but the hospitals didn't sign on to that. And at that
Why
point,
not?
Well,
they profess, Atrium at least professes to want clear pricing. We did a program with somebody big in the Atrium system a couple of years ago, where they bragged about their website, making it very easy for people to go in and find out what a procedure is going to cost them. So if they want to be transparent, why were they not on board with this?
One of the things they told our reporter was that they thought that it would be better to set the prices on the value of the care rather than the quantity. So
how do you determine value? That seems very subjective.
I don't know.
I mean, is it you go in for an appendectomy, and if you come out with a cold, do you pay less?
They said they submitted an alternative plan. That is also worth mentioning. I know Atrium said that, and we didn't get a copy, so we don't know where that went. Or clearly it wasn't used. But I think ultimately, you have, I think it was around 700,000 people who have this plan. So ultimately, it came down to, do all of these people lose? Many of them lose the major hospitals in their area as in-network providers. The deadline was coming up.
Doesn't Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina have plans that ordinary people buy into, not the state plan, that work just like the state plan in terms of clear pricing? Am I wrong about that? Does anybody know?
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, we'll come back and talk a touch more about that when we come back. Plus, there's other things to talk about as well. Believe it or not, a lot of news this week. For a summertime, this used to be sleepy time. Not anymore. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Mazda of South Charlotte, committed to Mazda's focus to ensure every element of a car is designed around the driver. More at MazdaofSouthCharlotte.com. And Duke Energy, dedicated to meeting more than half the Carolinas' power needs with carbon emissions-free electricity. Facts about their clean energy commitment at duke-energy.com/getmorefacts. Coming up next, the roundup continues on 1A. Joshua Johnson and his guests talk about the mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio. They'll also bring you the latest on the Trump administration's immigration policy, plus they cover Puerto Rico's new governor and the 2020 race from the Iowa State Fair. All that and more in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock right here on WFAE. And our roundup with Ann Doss-Helms, Joe Bruno, Eric Spanberg, and Daniel Shemtop continues in just a moment. Stay with us.
Awakenings don't have to be rude. Start your morning with civil conversation, the day's top stories, and insights on the elections. Wake up to Morning Edition from NPR News.
I'm Lisa Ward. Catch WFAE's Morning Edition each weekday morning from 5 to 9 on 90.7 WFAE at WFAE.org and with the WFAE app.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the Local News Roundup. Daniel Shemtop is with us from the Charlotte Observer this morning. Joe Bruno from WSOC-TV News. Eric Spanberg is the managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal, and Ann Doss-Helms is our education reporter here at WFAE. Before we move on, the State Employees Association have reached, as we said, this agreement with the hospitals about price, about putting people in network, putting hospitals in network on their new Blue Cross Blue Shield plan. Had they not done this, costs would have gone up tremendously for state employees like teachers and others on that plan if they had to use Atrium or Novant. They'd have to go to Caramont.
There would have been a massive rush to Caramont Regional Hospital in Gastonia. All different pregnant women hoping to have their babies there just to have an in-network provider.
So this all switched yesterday when they reached an agreement. And what does that agreement mean? I mean, does it mean now, because they want, the State Employees Association wanted the clear pricing plan, as it was called, where they could go on and find out what things cost. Does that mean now they cannot?
The ones that the hospitals that signed on to the original plan that he had suggested are going to keep using that.
Which is the 5,
plan.
right?
Yeah, the 5. And then the rest of them are basically using the rates they had already negotiated with Blue Cross Blue Shield.
So that means, was the attempt here to save money or to be more transparent?
Both.
So now we're not going to save money and we're not going to be more transparent. These are nonprofit hospitals. What are they afraid of?
Well, the state treasurer, right, came out and said, or his office came out and said, we're going to keep trying to push toward the model that we just blinked on, in essence, right?
Because it seems to me that the rank and file people who are on this plan, why do they care about what things cost? The insurance is going to pay for it, except for your deductible, which is not going to change. So why do you care?
Well, no, remember, this started with the treasurer, right? The state treasurer's office, he cares.
Yes.
And ostensibly because he's trying to save taxpayers' money. And so I think where you get into the patient's part is when they find out that they're not in network and would have to go elsewhere.
Right, and any time you have this kind of conflict,
right, and your deductible does rise.
When you have these conflicts between two large entities, they always both say they're speaking for the patients. Whether it's cost controls or whether it's the provider saying it's all about the quality of care that we want to give, and meanwhile the patients get really nervous. When you start hearing that it's coming toward the deadline for you to go to work and you may not be able to have a doctor that you can afford, that's very stressful.
And the hospitals said, before they reached this agreement, that the hospitals who didn't want to participate said they wanted to focus more on preventative care instead of price changes. What does that mean? I mean, seriously. The plan either pays for preventive care or it doesn't. It costs this or it costs that. What does that mean?
I think sometimes they have arrangements where the reimbursement that an institution gets, like, say, Novant or Atrium, is tied to how much they are providing, say, routine care for diabetes versus crisis care in the emergency room or somebody who needs an amputation or whatever. The goal is to get people into care early on.
Before it's an emergency.
Right. But that can still be very expensive. But it's not as expensive or as harmful as waiting till it goes into crisis.
So as we've spoken about many times, the Supreme Court walked away from making a decision in North Carolina about partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts, but now a state court is looking at partisan gerrymandering of legislative district and whether or not it would be constitutional under the state Constitution, and that has ramifications down the road for other states with regard to partisan gerrymandering. And so for the second time in 2 years now, a bipartisan group of former North Carolina governors has come together to weigh in. Republican Governor Jim Martin joined Democratic governors, I will not say Democrat, Jim Hunt, Mike Easley, and Bev Perdue in filing a court brief opposing the practice of partisan gerrymandering. Why?
Because they're saying that gerrymandering, while it has gone on in one form or another, in essence, since the country was founded, has become so unwieldy, so dramatic, that it is breaking the system, that there are legislative members, a majority of legislative members, who are at one political extreme or another, and there's no compromise, and so this needs to be changed by
is this what you
a nonpartisan group.
Is this what you would call an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, because they're filing this in favor of the plaintiff's argument to the courts?
In my limited knowledge, based on John Grisham novels, I would guess that's correct.
Yes, that is correct.
That's where I got that word.
Bendini, Lambert, and Locke.
That and the good wife. The only living governor missing from this list is Pat McCrory. Why did he not sign on?
I don't know why Governor McCrory didn't sign on, but GOP lawmakers are basically saying that since the Supreme Court decided to not get involved in this issue, the U.S. Supreme Court, then the state court shouldn't either.
And he did text the Observer reporter, was it Jim Morrill? I can't remember who wrote the story. Anyway, he had texted and said that it was, in essence, the liberal argument that the governors were supporting, and so that's why he did not feel it would be something he favored.
And I think he was saying he wanted to see the legislature fix itself as
Yes.
opposed to having judges step in and do it.
Will this have an impact? Do judges listen to former governors who say you really ought to rule in favor of the plaintiff?
It's a good question. I mean, I know it's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but every judge is different, so it's just really hard to say.
In this case, there are three of them.
Yes, each one.
2 Democrats and a Republican, I believe. All right, J.P. Morgan Chase has had a small presence in Charlotte and therefore the state for a while, but this week they began their expansion south from New York. They opened a branch in Chapel Hill, one of 18 to open soon in the Triangle, 40 in the state. How many in Charlotte?
21.
Coming?
Yeah, in the next 3 years.
The next 3 years. They're also expanding their ATM network to over 80 ATMs. Do people use ATMs anymore? I mean, really?
Well, I thought they didn't use branches, but all these banks keep opening branches.
So how many employees will this be around the state? Do we know?
Yeah, I think it's around 250 in total.
Is that a lot?
I mean, I think that this expansion is pretty significant. You know, some of the experts I've been talking to, especially as you just mentioned, you know, a lot of banks actually haven't been opening more branches because of what, you know, the trend of millennials using their phones and cash the checks. And so I do think it's pretty significant, and it definitely will bring in more competition for Wells Fargo and B of A, which have a very large majority of the market here.
J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon was in town yesterday. The stars aligned, and he was here to talk to business leaders at a luncheon. What did he tell them about the bank's plans and why they are doing this?
Well, you know, he basically was talking about, it's part of, I believe it's a 9-state expansion, and he was talking about just kind of the way that it will enhance their services. They already have, I think it's around 1 million customers between consumers and also small businesses for things like private banking, commercial banking. So, you know, they feel like the branches will help kind of expand their base and come in to get some more customers.
Of course, Bank of America and Wells Fargo are in New York City, which is the headquarters of J.P. Morgan Chase. J.P. Morgan Chase is the largest bank by assets in the country. They're not going to be headquartered here, but what does this mean in terms of competition for consumers, for retail banking, for private banking, and for our stature as a financial center? What does it do for us? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you have, with J.P. Morgan coming here, I know they're growing their headcount. I think you guys had a story on that. And, I mean, you have BB&T and SunTrust bringing employees here with their new...
Truist.
Yeah,
yes.
A new bank. So I think it's definitely solidifying Charlotte's stature. And I also think that it'll be interesting to see. I know that Chase and many banks offer, generally the thought is that this benefits consumers. And I know that banks often offer sort of these incentives to come join, like I think it's about $350 or something if you open up a new account. U.S. Bank is
always
bringing
do that.
branches.
Open the account,
Yeah.
get the money closed, close it, move on.
Yeah. Short term or long term, I don't know.
Just an anecdote about Chase. During the NBA All-Star Game, Shaquille O'Neal told my former colleague Davidson Tendry that his one criticism of Charlotte is that we don't have a Chase. The closest one is in Atlanta. So Shaq, now you have
Shaq
to come
can
back.
come back. That's right. By the way, they don't do toasters anymore for the bank opening account, do they?
No. So let me get this straight.
Just check.
A basketball player who makes $1 gazillion is worried about paying ATM fees?
Apparently.
That's why he's wealthy. See?
That's right. So we're also about to be joined by Minneapolis-based U.S. Bank.
Yep.
Their first branch, I think, will be where the old Dean and DeLuca used to be, so there'll be good eats there. Tryon Street, when are they scheduled to come into the market?
I'm not sure what the exact opening date is.
Okay. But they're going to be, it's going to be more than one branch?
Yeah, I think it's a total of 10 branches.
You would not know it from the lack of campaigning going on, but there are campaigns going on for city elections. They're underway. Mayor Vi Lyles has the biggest war chest, we are told by now. How much has she hauled in, and how is she spending that money?
She's got, I think she had about $89,000 on hand?
About $90,000.
$90,000 on hand.
That's low, isn't it? I mean, wasn't a lot more of that spent last time? Of course, she has no real...
Yeah, well, and that's part of the answer.
Yeah.
She is leading. I think last time, because I looked it up, she had raised over $500,000 last time, and Kenny Smith was higher than that, even though he lost. Clearly, she's not expecting as much of a challenge or the need to spend as much, but compared to council and everyone else, she is still the front runner in terms of raising money.
And City Council is also experiencing a windfall of campaign donations. Who's coming out ahead on that?
The incumbents are coming out ahead on that, as you would expect. And, Mike, as we have seen over and over with local races, real estate developers are your number one source of money. I can't imagine why that is, and I hope you're not going to break my heart with some of your political cynicism as you do.
I think they're just very civic-minded.
Yes.
Mayor Lyles has a Republican challenger, David Michael Rice, but Ron Kaufman, the Washington-based treasurer of the Republican National Committee and the head of the party's convention site selection committee, has given $1,000 to the Lyles campaign. Is that normal, or is that happening because she's been such a good hostess?
Well, Mike, I don't believe that RNC members traditionally have donated to Democratic Charlotte mayoral candidates.
Right.
I can't recall that, so I do think this is a little bit of a special circumstance. And, yet again, last week when the RNC meetings were here, the little bit that they allowed the media to see, there was universal praise for Mayor Lyles. So they continue to be grateful to a Democratic mayor for allowing them to come in.
There's a primary next month, which is September by my recognition. It's an off month for an election and an off year for an election. What do they anticipate? Who's up in the primary, first of all, and what kind of turnout do they expect?
Well, actually, they expect higher than normal turnout because you have Joe's favorite election, which would be NC9 congressional race between Dan McCready and Dan Bishop. And obviously that affects that portion of South Charlotte that's going to bring out a lot more voters. Michael Dickerson at the elections board said 25 to 30%.
That's not a primary. That's the actual
That's the general
actual
election. So you have a general election that affects a portion of the city, and then you have the primaries going on for all of the other city races.
Right. The at-large primary is going to be very competitive, especially since Lawana Mayfield is trying to pick up one of those 4 incumbent seats. And I think the 7th district will be interesting as well. Ed Driggs has a primary challenger.
Good news for all of us. We are holding a forum with the at-large City Council Democratic candidates on Wednesday, August 28th from 7 to 8 p.m. I think this show is doing that, if I recall correctly. I'm old and I can't remember stuff anymore. But anyway, that's going to be going on. I think it's going to be here at Spirit Square, I think.
Well, and Mike, from all these recent elections that Charlotte is still a very Democratic city in terms of registered voters. And so a lot of these races could be decided really in the primary.
So last week we learned of the emergence of organized opposition to something else that's going to be on the ballot, we think, in November, and that's the proposed sales tax for the arts and parks and greenways. Supporters have now turned to 3 3 political consulting firms to map out strategy for this newly formed Partnership for a Better Mecklenburg, is what they're calling it. Who formed the partnership?
So ASC really, Arts and Science Council really led this effort to come up with a campaign, and then they're going out and raising money privately, and that will pay for these 3 consultants. You have one is aligned with Republicans, Democrats, and then another one that's more of an issues-oriented group. And they haven't said what the budget is, but you're hearing whispers of $1 million, so it's going to be significant.
All right, South End continues to grow. We know that Lowe's is going to be building a 23-story building there. Another 10-story office tower apartment building is coming to South Tryon between West Boulevard and Hawkins. How many apartments?
I think it's around 200 apartments for that building. Yeah.
And that project also, as I understand it, includes the development of Wilmore Centennial Park.
Yes.
At the corner of South Tryon and Kingston. How big is the park? We don't know, like a couple of acres, maybe?
An acre? Yeah, it's not super big.
And then we have these 2 8-story buildings underway at West Bland. We have Scaly Bark Light Rail Station developing all kinds of stuff. I have one question for you, Danielle. Whither traffic?
That's a good T-shirt for Charlotte. 704 should get on that.
Traffic. I think that, the goal is to have these transit-oriented neighborhoods, right? And this is part of the city's effort. They had the transit-oriented development ordinance that they passed in April. Certainly there are going to be more people coming. They're going to have more cars. But they're hoping, I think, that people take the light rail.
And we heard last week about David Tepper's desires for a stadium with a retractable roof. The Fan Fest took place this week. David Tepper was there. I believe you were there, Eric. And he made a very, I think, sly, funny
Yes, it was very funny. There were several reporters standing behind a team bench because they let you on the field for the Fan Fest. And he said, "How many people are here?" And somebody said, "Well, the Panthers reported 62,500. Clearly they weren't." So I threw out a number. Somebody else threw out a number, and he said, "How many people do you think would be here if this place had a roof on it?" And then he just grinned and walked away.
Let the campaign begin.
That's right.
All right. That's Eric Spanberg, managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. Danielle Shemtab is with us from the Charlotte Observer today. Joe Bruno. Sorry, Joe. Reporter for WSSC-TV, Channel 9, Eyewitness News, and Andos Helms, education reporter for WFAE News. There's so much we didn't get to. I'm so sorry.
We'll have to come back next Friday.
We'll come back tomorrow. We'll do it again tomorrow. Thank you all for the hour.